Throughout our time in this lore series, we've learned that Ready or Not has a lot of dark corners. We've seen the absolute worst that humanity has to offer, the horrors that lie beneath its surface, but perhaps none of these are nearly as sickening as the story of the exploited. Now, for those of you who are just tuning in, throughout the last 2 episodes of this lore series, we've seen a wave of illicit child porn sweep over the city of Los Sueños. It's implicated everyone from famous online streamers to large local tech companies, and during our investigation, it becomes clear that this operation goes much further than we could ever realize. Now, it's important to note that thus far, we haven't really solved the problem here. We've arrested people who were in possession of CFAM, and we've even shut down the servers where it was being uploaded, but we've yet to capture any of the people who were actually making it. In a sense, we've cut off the tail of the operation, but the head of the snake still remains, lurking and biding its time. Now, in our last mission, we were able to obtain some evidence that pointed us in the direction of a child talent agency, known as Brixley Talent Time. It seems that children are being funneled here under the guise of making a name for themselves in the entertainment industry, only to be taken advantage of and exploited. I gotta take the time here to credit Void because child abuse and sex trafficking is incredibly prevalent in the entertainment industry. And although we only hear about the famous cases, like those with Harvey Weinstein, there are thousands more that go unnoticed or unreported due to a fear of potential backlash. So I really appreciate them illuminating this reality, even if it might be an uncomfortable one to talk about. Anyways though, in our mission briefing, we're told that this talent agency is located in an incredibly impoverished area known as the Row. Now, I imagine that this is probably in reference to the real-life Skid Row found in Los Angeles, and the large amount of homeless encampments that we can find around the map seem to suggest that this is the case. The building itself is an old safe injection clinic, but after closing down, it's been reopened as a talent agency under the guidance of George Brixley. Now, George Brixley is described in our briefing as being the owner and talent scout of this establishment. It's also worth mentioning that he was a former member of the US Army, and based off of his picture, it seems like he might be a fairly clean-cut guy. If this level wasn't set in the Ready or Not universe, one might even assume that George Brixley is a good person, but all of that immediately gets thrown out of the window the second you look further into his profile. You see, Brixley was recently discharged from the army and was jailed after being indicted on kidnapping and rape charges. And the very first thing that he did post-release was opening this child talent agency in the Row. And after hearing that, we can't help but feel a pit in our stomach because we know, regardless of the outcome, whatever we encounter here isn't going to be good. But with that being said, we'll need to prepare ourselves, gather our gear, and make our way towards Brixley Talent Time. Now, upon our arrival, we'll immediately get a glimpse into how rough the surrounding area is. There are dozens of homeless encampments, and they're to the point where they're overflowing into the actual streets. Something noteworthy here are the large amount of veteran signs that we see lying next to these camps. They suggest that that anti-vet bill that we talked about a few weeks ago had a much larger impact than we initially thought. It seems that once their benefits were taken away, a lot of these veterans were unable to provide for themselves, and they just wound up here, living on the streets. Next to the talent agency, we can find a small grocery store. And aside from a bit of evidence suggesting that there may have been a struggle, there really isn't a whole lot here worth mentioning. I imagine that these store owners likely got spooked by this massive police presence suddenly showing up, and in the process of this, accidentally knocked over some food in their produce section. Nothing here really seems to indicate that this situation was anything more sinister than that. So with that being said, we'll continue to move forward. Heading back outside and towards the front of the building, we can see that George Brixley didn't really put a lot of effort in getting this operation up and running. In fact, instead of replacing the safe injection clinic sign, he's instead opted to crudely draw over it with colorful paint. From outside looking in, this is probably the sketchiest location that we've seen in the entire game. And when we make our way inside, it somehow manages to get even worse. Now, upon our entry into the building, we'll almost always encounter some armed guards. All of these men are masked, and most of them seem to be toting submachine guns as well as various sidearms. Before getting into a massive gunfight with these men, though, we have to remind ourselves that there are likely several children on the premises, so we really need to operate here with a degree of caution. The presence of these guards raises a lot of questions, though. Are these men a permanent fixture of the talent agency, or are they here for a specific reason? Who has been funding all of these guards throughout the various levels? And lastly, but most importantly, why would a parent willingly walk their child into this place? As eager as we are to learn the answers to these questions, though, we'll have to wait just a bit to revisit them, because right now we still have a building to clear. The further that we progress through the talent agency, the worse this atmosphere becomes, though. We see crudely painted characters decorating the walls, as well as some posters and advertisements promoting the agency. After just a quick glance at some of these posters, it's obvious how exploitative they are. One of the posters mentions how if a parent is in need of quick cash, they can essentially just drop their kids off and let the talent agency do the rest. So on paper, these parents are dropping their kids off thinking that they're going to become the next child acting sensation, but in reality, something much worse is going on behind the scenes. You know what's a lot cooler than sketchy talent agencies, though? The sponsor of today's video, Vertigear. Now, most of you guys only know me as the disembodied voice in your favorite Ready or Not lore series, but the fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, I'm a gamer just like you. And the most important part of any good gaming setup is this: the chair. Vertigear creates the highest quality, most comfortable gaming chairs on the market. Vertigear actually specializes with chairs of different sizes. So I was actually able to go to their website and look through their specifications, and I found a chair that was perfectly tailored to me. I have a super comfortable and reliable gaming chair that I'm hoping to use for the next several years. So if any of what I just said sounds like something that might interest you, please consider checking Vertigear out today. I'll leave a link to their site down below. But with that being said, let's get back into today's video. Anyways though, we can make a left into a staff hallway, and here we'll find tons of old posters and equipment from that injection clinic that for some reason haven't been taken out yet. It seems like George Brixley has literally done the bare minimum to get this place up and running, and that he doesn't really care about portraying himself as a clean-cut business. Hell, in the back we can even find loose needles lying around, which if you were a guy that really cared about helping kids, isn't really something that you'd want to have in your building. In case you haven't quite gathered it yet, George Brixley doesn't give a fuck about these kids. This entire company of his is a front for something much more sinister. And the further that we continue along in this building, the more apparent that will start to become. Further along this employee area, we'll find bottles of alcohol lying about, as well as trash and wires littering the floors. We can also see a newspaper with a headline about the gas station manager that was killed in our first mission. But aside from that, this area doesn't really have any notable details. We can eventually work our way into a waiting room of sorts, and here again, we're likely to have an encounter with some of the guards. After the smoke clears though, we can glance around the room a bit, but all that we really seem to find are some toys and posters decorating the area. Walking through this waiting room though, we'll eventually come upon a set of double doors, and past this is perhaps one of the eeriest scenes that we'll encounter in the entire game. Staring directly at us as we walk in the doors is a ghoulish depiction of a smiling star, drawn by George Brixley. Throughout the rest of the building, we've seen Brixley's doodles covering the floors and walls, but none of them come even close to as unsettling as this. Above it all, wall, we can see cardboard cutouts of small stars dangling from the ceiling, and written on all of them are the names of the children that have been part of this agency. Now, while I didn't outright go and count all of these, from what I gathered, there's about 200 stars found throughout the building, which would imply that no matter how shady this place might seem to us, 200 parents looked around and decided that it wasn't a deal breaker, and they were willing to bring their kids here as a means of making more money. If we enter the first door on our left in this hallway, we'll find a small dressing room for the kids. In here, we'll see some clothing racks, a makeup station, as well as some creepy headshots that have been plastered on the walls. To say that the kids in these pictures are distressed would be a bit of an understatement. Some of them appear to be genuinely terrified, and based on what we've seen at this place so far, I think it's safe to say that this is the average reaction of these kids. In the next room over, we'll actually manage to see where Brixley had been taking these photos, as at the end of the room, we'll see a green screen and several lights. We can also find a small camcorder propped up on a tripod, and here we can listen to a recording of Brixley directing one of these children.
All right, kid, from the top.
I don't like this movie.
I don't care. Say the line.
I don't want to.
Say the fucking line!
I'm Cowboy George, and this is the wacky wild...
God damn it, no! You know what? Get out of here! Tell your mom to come in!
Through listening to this, it's obvious that Brixley doesn't have the patience or the empathy to work with children. That much has been profoundly clear from the get-go. So why is he really wasting all of his time running a shady-ass talent agency for kids? Well, we'll find the answer to that sitting on a nearby computer. On this PC, we'll see that Brixley has been in communication with a man named AV, which, if you remember from our last episode, was an anonymous individual that's been running a massive underground exploitation ring. We found out previously that this AV had been paying to stash illegal material on a private server, and although we managed to take his server down, we were never able to confirm his identity, and as such, he's still managing this operation from behind the shadows. The two men's message thread reads as follows, quote,
"Make the little redhead wear princess dress.
"Here, couldn't get her to smile though."
Perfect. She's going to look great on the cover. P.S. I'll get her to smile."
Next to the computer, we'll find some more of these creepy photos, but we'll also see some unmarked vials and a needle. Now earlier, I know I had mentioned that this building had previously been used as a safe injection clinic, and that we had found needles in other areas of the building, but their proximity to the camera set here has led me to come to a bit of a different conclusion. I believe that George Brixley has been drugging some of these kids into submission. It's clear that through that previous recording that some of the children had been giving George a hard time, and given his harsh temper and violent past, I wouldn't put it past him to try and drug them into a more docile state. This theory is further backed up by our environment. As I mentioned previously, there are nearby needles and vials, but there are also pills. Most damning to me, though, is the wheelchair sitting next to all of this. The kids were likely drugged to the point where they couldn't safely stand, so they had to be wheeled away in a wheelchair. Across from all of this, we can see some writings on a nearby wall, which read, "Do it for your children. Reach for the stars. Think of the money." It's clear to us that George Brixley is making a living off of exploiting families in trouble. Given the area that this place is located in, it's safe to assume that some of the parents are in a very rough way. And when times get tough, you try and find a solution. Brixley frames this to them in a way where they're just doing their kids a favor. They're not delivering their child to a predator, they're just jump-starting their acting career. This place might seem a bit suspicious, but what talent agency doesn't have some skeletons in the closet? But these literal writings on the wall reveal to us the real reason why this is occurring: greed. In a nearby office, we can find more of the same. On the desk sits a contract for Brixley's services, stating that he's to be the children's representative for no fewer than 2 years. And ominously, sitting next to this contract, we can find multiple condoms. It seems that Brixley is using his position of authority to extort sexual favors from some of these kids' parents. And unfortunately, seeing some of the outfits that he has in his office, I think that he's doing the same thing to the children as well. On this desk, we can also find a recording, which seems to be of a therapist interviewing Brixley. And in it are some details that help to paint a better picture of the type of man this monster is. Now, in this interview, the therapist touches on how George had briefly had some therapy sessions as a child, but George quickly waves this mention off, stating that the sessions were pointless and irrelevant. Following that thread, though, George begins to mention how he used to be on TV as a kid, and that he was a child actor. However, when the therapist questions him about it more, George once again shuts down and redirects the conversation. Now, this might be a bit of a stretch, but based off of this recording, I think that George Brixley was once a child actor. However, after some sort of abuse, he was forced to leave the industry and attend therapy sessions as a child. Now, while to some of you this may be just trivial information, it's actually a huge thread in this story, as cycles of sex abuse are a fairly common story in the entertainment industry. And while this in no way excuses George Brixley for his monstrous actions, it does offer us a bit of insight into why he might be this way. Regardless, though, we need to continue moving forward and finish our sweep of this building. And the last room that we have to check is George's office. In here, we can find a desk covered with pictures of children, as well as a handgun and a briefcase filled with money. I think it's safe to assume that Brixley is showing the kids' pictures to this mysterious AV character, and the ones that AV likes, he delivers to his doorstep. And as a result of this service, he's being paid very handsomely. On a nearby counter, we can find another recording of a therapy session, but this particular one doesn't really seem to have too much of note. And once we manage to take down Brixley and arrest him, there isn't really much left here for us to discuss. So with that being said, we can head back to the station for debrief. The Spider is probably one of the most sickening missions that we've played in Ready or Not. It shows a bleak depiction of what life is like in Los Sueños, and it goes to show us just how far some people are willing to go to make ends meet. At first, I really wanted to share a bit of sympathy for the parents because I felt like they were being taken advantage of. But the more that the level went on, the more unforgivable their actions became. I mean, who in their right mind would ever walk their child into a place like this, let alone leave them here in the hands of such monsters? This might be a bit harsh, but in my opinion, if you're willing to look past all of these red flags and gamble your child's life and well-being for a couple of extra bucks, then you're no better than the man who's orchestrating all of this. In all likelihood, I imagine that this money probably isn't going towards rent or groceries either. Based on the surrounding area and the context of this situation, I'd have to guess that it's probably drugs. And I suppose that this is just another cruel example of how addiction is ruining the lives of people in this city. But none of this is to mention the actual criminal operation unfolding here. As I mentioned earlier in the video, it appears that several hundred kids have gone through this talent agency, and there's no telling how many of them have been exploited. Based on what we've seen in this storyline so far, there isn't just one villain. There's an entire system of them. It is a network of enablers, profiteers, and apathetic parents who all play a role in keeping this cycle alive. And what's worse is that this isn't fiction for a lot of people. While Ready or Not is just a game, sometimes the horrors that it depicts are very real. George Brixley may be behind bars now, but this operation isn't over. The head of the snake, this mysterious figure known only as AV, still remains at large. And until that shadowy force is brought to justice, these crimes will continue to fester in the dark. And to me, that's the most chilling part of it all. Not just the evil itself, but how easily it hides in plain sight. So if there's anything that we can take away from this mission, it's that evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it's popular, sometimes it's a business, and sometimes it even smiles. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch today's video. And if you haven't already, please be sure to go and check out the 2 episodes leading up to this, because they provide a bit more context that I didn't talk about in today's episode, and they can give you a better grasp on the fuller picture of this entire storyline. So go check them out. But with that being said, you know I love you. I'm out.